Let's bring in Senator Chris Coons. Senator, thank you for being with us. We've got a lot to talk about this morning, but let's first get your reaction to the president's speech in Afghanistan. Do you agree with us that the president didn't go for enough, or do you agree with the Joint Chiefs that the president may have gone too far?
Well, I think that the president should have announced a change in strategy. What I've asked for is a clear strategic change from the counterinsurgency current strategy, the nation-building strategy, to one that focuses on counterterrorism. And I think the consequence of a counterterrorism strategy in Afghanistan would be a significant withdrawal of our forces, a drawdown to lighter, more special operations focus, more intelligence-led, the sort of focus on targeting, capturing, and killing those who really do pose a threat to our security in the future. So I applaud the president's decision to draw down by the end of next summer the surge troops. I agree with a number of things you've said earlier today, that this is a country where we are trying to build a nation where there is no nation to be built. And we on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee just got a report back last week that suggests the $19 billion we've spent on building infrastructure and roads and schools and so forth has had very little sustainable positive impact.
Wow.
I'm concerned our partner in Karzai is corrupt and unreliable. I think there are lots of good reasons why the president made the decision he did. I just hope it'll be followed up by a clear change in our strategy in Afghanistan, so we've got the resources to deal with the real threats to our national security emerging in places like Iran, in Yemen, in Somalia, and elsewhere.
Senator Donny Deutsch, let me troubleshoot now. And Gene, I'd like to ask you the same question. Gene, I know you're going to come out on this. Senator, what would have happened if the president got up the other night and said, you know what, we're going home? You know, it's 50,000 this year, it's 50,000 next year. We're doing this in 9 months. What was
by the way, we'll keep 9,000 troops there, and we'll continue the massive drone attack.
I still don't understand what would have happened. What would have been worse? Why would we be worse off? Would the cockroaches come out later? I don't get that piece of the equation.
Well, my view is that we would have seen a complete collapse of our strategic situation in Afghanistan.
What does that mean exactly? What does that mean exactly? When you say, take me through, let's war game this.
Right.
We do this instead of over the next 3 years, we do this over the next 9 months. What would that 22-month difference be, other than saving us $300 billion in lives?
We've got about 100,000 American troops and more than 30,000 coalition troops currently on the ground in Afghanistan. A drawdown that rapid, I'm not sure we can execute in a responsible and safe way, and I do think the inevitable consequence would be the quick collapse of the Karzai regime. I think the path the president has chosen gives us a reasonable chance that a pro-U.S. regime, or at least a tolerable regime, stays in place, that the Afghan National Security Forces we've invested so much in training and standing up have a fighting chance, and that the gains that we've made on the ground that so many of our troops have sacrificed for are possible to be held on to. I mean, I do think the president chose a strategically more wise path forward than an abrupt and complete withdrawal.
Senator, this is Michael Steele. With all due respect, I'm with Joe Sixpack here. I mean, I hear what you just said.
Hey, there you go.
But what? But what? I don't understand. What's the end game? I mean, you're talking about the Karzai regime, you know, collapsing in what, 9 months' time under that scenario that Donny just laid out. But you're saying that it's going to be more stable in 2 years or 3 years? What's the evidence for that?
Michael,
I guess I'm trying to understand what has the administration articulated or anyone articulated that gives the American people comfort that there is a recognizable end game here, that when the last troop
Michael,
come
Secretary
home,
Clinton yesterday was testifying in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about the path forward in Afghanistan, which includes negotiations, a reconciliation process, much as happened in Iraq, where the Sons of Iraq program was successful in reintegrating folks who had previously been fighting us. There is an effort underway to try and achieve some sort of reintegration of the lower-level Taliban fighters and some sort of reconciliation, a political reconciliation, led by the Karzai regime with the Taliban. I do think there is a prospect that that could succeed, and that we could have a moderately stable and successful Afghan situation on the ground for the next few years. We do have to be worried about Afghanistan returning to being a place from which extremist jihadist fighters might seek to attack the United States. But my core concern is more Pakistan. That is a much more dangerous and unstable country. It's got the fastest growing nuclear arsenal in the world. It's home to a half dozen jihadist groups. And my concern is that our current footprint in Afghanistan and our current strategy in Afghanistan is actually destabilizing Pakistan. It is a very difficult region without easy answers.
Gene, let me bring you in. I guess the biggest problem is that most policy leaders that we have around the table will say the problem is Pakistan, just like the senator said. And yet, the only thing our Afghanistan policy does is strengthen Pakistan because it weakens us, strengthens India because it weakens us, strengthens China because it weakens us, strengthens all of our, not enemies, but our rivals, as Dr. Brzezinski said, because it weakens us. We are in a new century. We are in a new era. We are going to lose the war at home while we're trying to win the war in Afghanistan.
I think you're right, Joe. I also think the senator raised a great point. Our footprint in Afghanistan is too big. It is destabilizing for Pakistan, and Pakistan is the larger problem. That alone is a reason for, I think, a rapid shrinking of that footprint in Afghanistan. And in terms of getting Afghanistan to where Iraq is, just in terms of human development, in terms of education, and infrastructure, it would take 20 years, 50 years to get just to get Afghanistan to where Iraq is.
Right.
I just don't think that's practical to think in terms of our doing it in 3 years. I think it's not going to happen.
Senator, let's touch on the budget. You write a piece for Politico called Balancing the Budget, and you say in part this: our long-term deficit is too big to address simply by raising taxes on the wealthiest Americans or by slashing domestic spending. The math just doesn't add up.
Amen.
Each side will have to give some cherished ideological ground as part of a compromise. Americans don't hesitate to do what is necessary when faced with threats to the security of our nation. It should be no different when confronted by such a fundamental threat to our nation's economy. And you have talked about something called Save Go. Explain what that is and how it would help with our deficit.
Well, SaveGo is a budget mechanism that's based on the success we had in the 90s when we had divided government, a Democratic president, a Republican Congress that successfully balanced the budget. One of the very few times in the last 60 years we've had a balanced budget. SaveGo suggests that we take what is the political kryptonite for both parties, raising revenue for Republicans, entitlement cuts for Democrats, and take those two pieces of kryptonite and put them in a lead-lined box and say, we will pass real, targeted savings every year for the budget, and we'll get ourselves to the table and negotiate those savings. And if we fail to negotiate those savings, then automatic revenue increases and entitlement spending reductions go into place. Neither party wants those things, so that should help keep us at the table. I was frustrated but not surprised to hear that Congressman Cantor and Senator Kyle walked away from the negotiations being led by Vice President Biden earlier this week. I think we need to keep all parties at the table. We're having a tough time sustaining a recognition of how big this problem is. We have to have cuts in Pentagon spending, we have to have increases in revenue, we have to have reform in our entitlement programs, and we have to have cuts in domestic discretionary spending. We have to have all four. This is one of the biggest challenges we face as a country. At a time when our competitors around the world are making the right investments in R&D, in education, in infrastructure, and they're beating our pants off in the global economy, we have to get our finances right in order to provide a strong foundation for our kids' future. SaveGo is a budget mechanism that would allow us to begin the real hard process of negotiating the $4 trillion in savings over the next decade that every economist who's been before us in the Budget Committee believes we have to do to stabilize our debt.
Leave it to a guy from Delaware. A guy from Delaware, Gene Robinson, to get it right. I mean, he is saying what we've been saying here for a very long time. Of course, we define right by whether you agree with us or not, Senator.
Yes.
But Gene, he framed it perfectly. We are competing against other countries that are investing in education and infrastructure and R&D and all of these areas. We're fighting wars across the globe. We have entitlement programs that are bloated, that are going bankrupt. We have an unsustainable tax system. this has got to be resolved and resolved soon.
It has to be resolved. I think that what the senator said was great, and we should bottle that soundbite. You know, the president said, "Let's do nation building at home." We can't do it now. We have a federal government, a federal government that's essentially a great big, heavily armed health insurance company. That's what our government is.
Eugene Robinson, Senator Coons, thank you so much.
Thank you.